Robert Jenrick's vigilante Twitter video, we showed it yesterday, it's clocked up 12 million views on X. I mean, it sparked a really big national debate, actually. And so, as I said, we showed you the video in full yesterday. Just to jog your memory before we look at some of the reactions, here's a short part of it.
Excuse me, do you think it's all right not to pay? Seriously, why do you go back through the barrier and pay? Do you want to go back and pay like everybody else? Do you think it's all right not to pay? Why don't you go back and pay? You can say off as much as you want, but everyone else has to pay. You're carrying a knife, you say? Nearly 1 in 25 people using London's public transport aren't paying for it. So there's 8 officers down there, but 1 minute away, that gate's wide open. It's also just annoying watching so many people break the law and get away with it.
So that video has divided opinion. Lots of people saying it's accidental partridge. Other people saying it's very effective political communication. And what's undeniable is it has had an impact. Not many people are paying attention to any Tory politicians at the moment. So to get 12 million views on your Twitter video, that's an achievement in itself to some degree. As for the responses, I think you can divide them into basically three main groups. So the first is people who agree with Jenrick and say that crime is a growing problem and that it's caused by police or other law enforcement officials going too soft. A second argument, obviously much more common on the left, is to say that yes, there has been an increase in rule breaking, or at least an increase in general social decay, but the cause isn't soft policing, but rather poverty or cuts to social services under years of austerity. There's also the third position. This one's often put forward, or is being put forward by some liberals, that it's the problem in the first place, which is actually massively overstated. This was Hugo Rifkind on Times Radio.
Do you really think that? I mean, I've been in this city 25 years now. I wander around. I love it. It's a sort of vibrant, joyful place. I mean, do you really think it's a more scary place to be than it was 20 years ago?
Yeah, I do. Look, I mean, like you,
crime is down.
Like you, I think London is an
amazing
city, and I want it to be the best city in the world. But if you talk to people, they are now worried about going out in London. People are not wearing watches. People are worried about their mobile phones being stolen. Nightlife is massively down in London because young people don't feel that it's the safe city that they want to live in. So, this is what people say to me. This is, I think, the vibe that you get in London. And it is Sadiq Khan who has been presiding over this, and he needs to step up and take action.
The idea that the problem with nightlife is that people are worried about crime, I think, is very, very unconvincing. A much better explanation here, I think, is that lots of bars have closed down because rents are very high. And also, I mean, I think the real one here, and so many stories, I think the real explanation of this changing trend is smartphones and social media. People hang out less than they used to because they spend more time on their phones. I think that's a big shame. I don't think that's because of sort of widespread social disorder. We'll show you some data in a moment. First of all, Helena, I want to get sort of your thoughts on this. I sort of laid out 3, I suppose, responses that people have had to this Robert Jenrick video. It's been sort of all over the news for the last 48 hours, really, sort of on all the different talk shows, people discussing it. What's your response? How did you sort of interpret that Jenrick video and the debate that it's created?
Well, I think I kind of, as you would expect, lean very heavily towards the kind of leftist proposal that you laid out there. I do feel like the social contract is broken. I mean, we basically don't have a social contract. The kind of cultural neoliberalism, again, that we have imbibed as a culture, as a society, since 1979, is one in which we don't have the assumption of a social contract. That's been the dominant economic narrative for the last 46 years, right? That hasn't changed, and it's only gotten worse since then, in a world where we're atomized, where we are seen to take every single action and transaction that we make within society as being done for self-interest and self-preservation rather than towards a societal project, right? That is Thatcherism, plain and simple. And this was a deliberate thing, right? It just, as a Marxist would say, that the base informs the superstructure, Margaret Thatcher would have said, well, the method is economics, but the goal is to change the soul. And at the point at which we don't have any kind of shared some shared goal as a society at the moment where we don't want to create a society or a community and we're only individual actors making individual economic transactions, well, yeah, of course, we're not going to you think that it is worth paying into something if we believe that it's not being done for the good of us, especially not at a time in which it feels like the elites and the people in charge and the establishment all look like the rules don't apply to them as well. And again, that's always been the case for the last 46 years as well. We had 2008 where the banks were bailed out and no one else got anything close to that remuneration. We had to close libraries in Wolverhampton, as Alexei Sell famously pointed out, to solve the problem caused by the super rich and traders and people like that. And then austerity was pushed upon the population at large. And then during the pandemic, the rich got fabulously wealthy whilst our own elected politicians were breaking the laws that they set. Like, I don't think anyone looks at our society, whether they're from the right or the left, and can see a functioning social contract. Which I think is important, though, is that the message that Robert Jenrick is putting out there, it's not for Londoners. I think people try and look at this as him denigrating London because he wants to try and win people over who are scared about London, who live there. No, this is for the curtain twitcher brigade outside of London. It's for people going, oh, look, you can't elect the left, the scary lefties like Steve Carton's, it ruins the scary London place. You'd never want to go to London, would you? It's all got the scary knife crime and barbershops and phone theft. And I'm like, well, that's, I think, overstated somewhat in the way that Hugo Rifkin would say, but I think these things are, once we look at the stats, we can have a little bit more of an actual appreciation of where the data lies on this one. But broadly, I think that the main issue that we have is inequality. When you have levels of petty theft, when you have rates of small, low-level crime, this is symptomatic of not just poverty specifically, but relative poverty. It is inequality that is the problem, right? You see plenty of countries, for example, in the global south, those kind of societies, where you do still see a social contract, you do still see far more community cohesion, even though they're in poverty, because the relative poverty isn't that bad. Yet what is unique, especially in the neoliberal West, outside of the more equal social democracies in Northern Europe, especially where they have a much greater social contract, a much greater buy-in from society, is you do see places like you'll see boroughs in London where you'll have one street on one end where you'll have people on breadlines in council housing, and on the very same street at the other end you'll have multi-million pound penthouses, or even empty housing being owned by Russian, or I guess previously Russian, oligarchs to use as a cash cow and as an investment vehicle. I mean, you talked about Turkish barbershops about being potentially money laundering ventures, and there's some evidence of this in his video. And I'm like, well, the biggest money laundering operation in this country is the City of London, right? If we're looking towards Turkish barbershops as patient zero here, and not towards, Canary Wharf, for example, we're looking in the wrong places. But of course, it's the people who are doing the white collar crime, I guess, who are related to the sector, I guess, which is more focused on white collar crime, who donate to the Conservative Party. So Robert Jenrick's not going to criticize them, but he can very easily pander to the kind of curtain twitcher, as I said, conservative demographic by scaring them about what the inner cities look like. There's a big thing where people, especially anti-immigration people, fear their little rural town or community looking like the big cities, even though what's actually happening in the big cities probably wouldn't happen there at all.
Yeah, we'll go to the stats in one moment. I suppose I see the point behind all three of those positions. Now, I don't in any way empathise with Robert Jenrick, because he's talking about a breakdown in law and order, and obviously his party caused it. I think defunding the police, that like the Tories did, was really stupid. Like there is sort of very clear data from the IFS that sort of showed where local police stations shut down, you did have a relative increase in crime. So I think that was stupid, and I don't think that the left should be scared to say, you should invest in the police, because it's not good for society to see people sort of openly breaking rules all the time. I've obviously got loads of sympathy with the argument you've just made to say that one of the big reasons why there has been some degree of social decay is because of inequality, austerity, youth centres very clearly. I think it's so obvious to see the connection between shutting down youth centres and, as we're going to see, knife crime has gone in the wrong direction. I do also, though, have a fair amount of sympathy with the argument that Hugo Rifkin made, which is that we're massively overstating the problem here to some degree. Let's look at some statistics. So this is data from the England and Wales Crime Survey. And it shows you that the number of people telling the survey they've experienced a crime in the past year has fallen by more than 75% since the mid-90s. In 2024, it was up 15% on the previous year, but that's that sort of small little blue thing you can see there. Obviously, you didn't get data during COVID, so that's why you got that breakup. The higher lines there are if you include computer fraud. On the sort of less positive side, police recorded knife crime is significantly higher than it was in 2014. There were 50,000 offences involving a knife in 2024 compared to just 26,000 in 2010. Although knife crime was actually higher at points in the noughties, so it depends where you start your graph. In London, this is a graph which goes much further back, as you can see. The peak in homicides was in 2003, 2004, when 211 people were killed. In 2023, 2024, the number was half that at 108. Now, as far as I understand, that there are some crimes which have clearly gone up. Phone thefts and bike thefts in London do seem fairly endemic at the moment. I've seen, in the past 12 months, someone steal a bike off someone in a park and someone steal a phone out of someone's hand. So that is something which everyone is very much aware of. But that also happened in the past, and overall crime is massively down. And London, I totally agree with Hugo Rifkin, is a much safer place to walk around now than it was 20 years ago. So I live in Hackney at the moment. I was brought up in Leighton, which was just next door. And when I was a kid, if I found out someone lived in Hackney, I'd be like, oh, that's a bit of a scary place to go. And that was because crime was quite high in Hackney, and it's not anymore. This is largely, by the way, to do with sort of CCTV. It's harder to steal a car now than it ever was. And Helena, I suppose I have a theory here, which is that one of the big reasons for polarization, one of the big reasons why everyone is so negative about everything and potentially sees everyone thinks society is going in a terrible direction in every single aspect, is because of smartphones. Because it's not that crime has increased, it's that people see more criminal activities because people keep sharing them on their phones. So the reason people think London is out of control is because you see this video on your X feed, which is showing, a couple of kids waving a knife around. Obviously, kids waving knives around is terrible. It shouldn't happen. But that also happened 20 years ago, and people didn't think about it so much because you didn't get this one video that then goes viral, and then everyone thinks, "Oh my God, this is terrible." And then I think what you get is it increases polarization, because anyone who's sort of right leaning thinks, "Oh, I've seen this video of a kid holding a knife. This means crime's out of control. Law and order has broken down." And then on the other side, you have a video of like a police officer being horrible to someone, and then everyone thinks, "Oh, this is endemic. Police violence is getting worse. Crime is getting worse." Everyone thinks everything's getting worse because these videos are going viral. When on all accounts, the statistics shows that actually you're safer from everyone than you used to be. The AI sort of overlord might change all of this in the next 5 years. But as it stands, I do think that people have a more negative impression of life outside than they need to because of sort of the dynamics of social media. I don't know. What do you think about that?
And I think that you're absolutely right, for sure, at least to some extent, right? I'm not a criminologist. I couldn't tell you the relationships between people's perceptions of crime and the reality of crime in a kind of quantitative sense, But I think you're definitely onto something there. And on top of this, the social media algorithms are primed to create even more of this polarization. Of course, the access that social media gives you is much higher, but that access is predicated on the social media algorithms prioritizing engagement and prioritizing contention, because contentiousness is also a very engaging, right? Trying to get people into arguments, driving levels of antagonism on social media between especially different polarized groups of people is an excellent way to be able to target more adverts at people. And of course, there are plenty of ways in which that, as we have seen historically in the kind of Cambridge Analytica era that we're living in, is that for political purposes, people are able to try to pay money for adverts to try and foment these narratives further. Once they know that these things are popular and have engagement, they can ride that to be able to drive that polarization further for their own ends too. So it's kind of a very self-invigorating, or I'm forgetting the term that we used here, right? So it's self-reinforcing. It's a self-reinforcing mechanism, circular here, that allows this to go even further to drive this, which I think is a really interesting point. And that is the kind of demographic I think that Robert Jenrick is trying to appeal to with the video. As I called them, don't want to look like a boomerphobe, because I talk about it far too often, right? Don't want to drive into generational conflict here. But I do feel like there is a certain generation of people who never really grew up as digital natives in the social media era, who got onto social media during the pandemic because they were stuck at home with nothing else to do and don't have a similar kind of filter system to digital natives to understand the framing of what they're being given through their social media algorithms, right? They don't understand how to properly filter out the level to which something is an immediate and or pressing concern, because it's again being framed for them by the kind of things that they're being given through these social media algorithms. It's when you know that some things are worth taking with a pinch of salt or not, because that's what you've grown up with. It's very easy to be able to at least somewhat distinguish between something that you should care about and something that you shouldn't. But if you're somebody who's only got into social media, or at least heavily into social media in the last 5 years or so, that filter system hasn't existed yet. And we've seen levels of zero-sum thinking. We've seen levels of the level to which people feel distrustful, much increasing in that specific demographic of people as well. The interesting data from More in Common about levels of zero-sum thinking, the ways in which people feel unsure about their future, in which generations and which cohorts that's increasing. Well worth looking into that data. I mean, again, I don't have all the answers here, but I think you've got a really interesting proposal there.